It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. We got a big show for you. His planned topic, transparency around certificates. An interesting way to find out if the certificates your site is using are real, if they're from your site, what other certificates might be out there from somebody pretending to be your site. We'll also talk about Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. This may have gone unnoticed, but one of the patches may be one of the worst vulnerabilities ever. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 481, recorded November 11th, 2014. Certificate Transparency. Security Now is brought to you by IT Pro TV. A good IT Pro is always learning, and IT Pro TV is the resource to keep your skills and knowledge up to date. IT Pro TV offers engaging courses streamed to your Roku, your computer, your mobile device. For 30% off the lifetime of your account, go to itpro.tv/securitynow and use the code SN30. And by ProXPN. ProXPN is a virtual private network that allows you to use the internet the way it should be, anonymously and without oversight. Save 50% with a 12-month subscription right now. Go to proxpn.com/twit and use the code SN50 at checkout. It's time for Security Now, the show that covers your security and privacy online with the guy, the man, the explainer-in-chief, Mr. Stephen Tiberius Gibson. Hello, Stephen. Good to see you. I'm going to say this right up front because they ask this every time in the chat room. What are those blinky lights over your left shoulder?
Those are clones of the very first mini computer one of the very first mini computers I ever programmed. The venerable DEC, the Digital Equipment Corporation, PDP-8.
Yeah,
and
baby.
Some years ago, the very end of life of that mini computer, which itself was like a sort of a small refrigerator size thing. I mean, it was the original one was just not even integrated circuits. This predated the availability of ICs. So this was the so-called discrete components: transistors, resistors, and capacitors. Mostly transistors and resistors. There wasn't much need for capacitors back then, in the signal path anyway. And so it's a 12-bit mini computer that has 3 bits for the operation code, meaning that in sort of nominally 8 different instructions, except that the math has more power in the individual bits in the rest of the instruction. So at the very end of life, they made a chip. They put the entire mini computer into a single chip. And some guy found some of those available on, like on the surplus market. And I've got mail coming in here, distracting me there. And made a kit that a number of people built. And of course, one wasn't enough for me. I had to have 3. So there's 3 PDP-8s. Oh, and I forgot to say that what the blinking lights are is the whole point of the old style mini computers was that they had front panels. They had so-called lights and switches, blinking lights and switches, sometimes known as the blinking lights panels. So I wrote some software to show that off. That is because this is the way computers back then looked like when they were actually doing something, was that they sort of had a sort of a sporadic changing. They weren't just like blinking like randomly in a constant pattern. And so I attempted to write some software that made them look like they were actually busy. So nothing's actually happening back there at all, but it's just fun.
What's the clock speed on those?
I should know that. That's annoying. But
although you can't compare it to a kind of a standard microprocessor either.
Oh, Lord, no. I know that some of the cycle times on the core memory, because that's what they used,
Right.
was like 1,200 microseconds, so 1.2 milliseconds, and a millisecond would be 1,000 instructions per second. So that's right around, because there were also some cycle times of 800 microseconds, which would be a little faster than a millisecond. So right around the average, or, right around the neighborhood of 1,000 instructions per second. So when and these, for example, did not have any hardware multiply or division. And multiplication and division are famously and sort of paradoxically difficult things. I mean, they're time consuming to do. They're iterative, and you essentially you take, in the case of, for example, a 12-bit computer, if you multiply two 12-bit values, you get a 24-bit result. So the act of multiplying involves lots of shifting and bit testing and summing, and then you need to do double precision math. So where you have to take the carry from the output of the first half and move it into the second half. The point is that just doing something simple that we would think of simple, like a multiply, which contemporary chips just all do instantly. They've got dedicated hardware where you just give it the two numbers and it says, here's your answer. That takes a long time. And when every single one of those processes is 1,000th of a second, before long, you've used up a second just to do something simple. So what I miss about those days is you had very little memory, 4K words, 4,000 words was the sort of like the starting point. And since it was 12 bits, that is 4K. 10 bits is 1K. So 12 bits is 4K. So then, so that was the normal default amount of memory is 4K words. And they had a basic interpreter interpreting the basic language in 4K. Well, I wish somebody would say to me, Steve, it's really important for us to have one, because I would just love to do that. But no one's asking for that anymore.
Apparently not.
No.
Why not? You'd think there'd be...
That's just my strange nature. The best I could do now is program everything in assembly language, which everybody already thinks is a little demented.
You're already crackpot. Don't push it any farther.
I'm out there.
I didn't mean to sidetrack you, but about every 8 episodes, you should probably just
perfect.
That,
Give me a reminder when we need to just explain what all that is back there going on.
And a couple of times during the tenure of this show. I like that, the 10-year tenure. You have mentioned that these kits are available, and because the guy has to silkscreen them in a batch and blah, blah, blah. But so currently not available, these PDP-8 clones. Right.
They have come and gone. Sometimes you'll see somebody parting with one on eBay, with a tear in his eye. And I have some of the original PDP-8s and 11s and like reel to reel. They had a beautiful little tape drive called Deck Tape, which used cute little reels, and it used a Mylar technology where it was Mylar on both sides containing the magnetic material, rather than traditional tape that was the oxide on one side of the Mylar, and those have not stood up well over time, whereas Deck Tape has. Anyway, someday, my plan is to bring all that stuff back to life. I just, if no one's going to ask me to do it now, I'll give myself the project when I'm 70.
We do have quite a bit to talk about today. You're going to do a what you call a propeller hat episode.
Yeah. There's... when I settled down to think, okay, what do I want to talk about this week? And I didn't want to do another Q&A because we've had 2 in a row. It was a relatively quiet security period during the last week. I do want to talk about something really fun that happened for me. I snuck off to Las Vegas and presented Squirrel for the very first presentation of its life ever at a security summit in Las Vegas, and encountered the lead architect of the Squirrel's main competition, the Fido project that we've talked about.
Oh, you talked to them. Oh, good.
And blew his mind.
Oh, boy. Good. Even better.
It was really made the whole thing way worthwhile for me.
Awesome.
Although I really enjoyed that. And the conference was hosted by DigiServe. But anyway, I'll talk about that in a second. The topic for today is something that's been in the air for a little over a year. And this is another of Google's many initiatives, largely most of which I support. I mean, as we know, I chafe a little bit when they decide that some of the things they want to do, or I don't feel like they're being completely forthcoming. The CRL set controversy, of course, comes to mind. And then I was a little annoyed at them arbitrarily pushing forward all of the expiration of SHA-1 certs just because they wanted to. But there are other things, like we've talked about Speedy. They're working on protocols to smooth and enhance and speed up our experience using the web. And obviously, they have a huge commitment to that themselves. Today's topic is something known as certificate transparency. And there's a website, certificate-transparency.org, which is like the formal place where this lives. There's an RFC 69, I can't remember what it is. I've written down. We'll get to it later. But the point is, this is Google's initiative, which is underway. As I said, there's an RFC submitted last July of 2013, to augment and fix the problems with the current certificate hierarchy, the whole certificate authority trust, root trust problem that we talk about all the time. So there are, to really get into the implementation, I haven't figured out how to explain it in an audio podcast without lots of diagrams. But to give everyone a sense of it, that we can do. And that's really enough for now, because I'm not sure if it's going to happen. I mean, it's to listen to Google, they're going to make it happen, because they're going to require it for EV certs starting early next year. Like I read February of 2015, which is not long from now. But anyway, so that's today's topic. We'll talk about that. And we have to talk about, this is the second Tuesday of the month. And as I was saying to Leo before he hit the record button just now, I was just sort of rummaging around through the Patch Tuesday, and the third one just poked me in the eye. It's like, oh my goodness, I'll be making a trip to my data center this afternoon.
Whoa.
Like, wow. And so will every single person running a web server with IIS, and even Windows users who are not having servers exposed have to do this. So we got a big Patch Tuesday. We got, and a surprising event in the net neutrality struggle occurred yesterday that I'll chat with Leo about. I want to talk a little bit about my trip to Las Vegas and what happened, and an important Belkin firmware router update. So another great podcast, I think.
Can't wait. Before we get too far into the weeds, let's start a little conversation about our great friends at IT Pro TV. They've got some pretty exciting announcement coming up here. But let me explain first what IT Pro TV is. Well, it says it right on the front page. An easy and entertaining approach to online IT training, or as they sometimes say, learn without even knowing it. IT. IT Pro TV was created by two guys, Tim and Don, who were long-time IT trainers. I mean, guys who had been doing this for years. They saw what we did here at TWIT. They actually went to a panel that I was on at the National Association of Broadcasters, and they got a bright idea. Wish they'd talk to me first. But they got a bright idea. Why don't we do what TWIT does, but for IT training? Actually, I'm being facetious because they have done a great job of it. I'm really proud of the work they've done, and it really is a great solution for anybody who wants to polish up their IT skills, maybe get a cert so they can get a better job, or a company that wants to keep its IT department up to speed. Hundreds of hours of content now. 30 hours are added each week. Yes, they do it live. In fact, we're watching a live stream right now, if you're on the video stream, including the live chat room, just as we do. So you can go in there, you can ask questions. There's Don right there. Their episodes cover things like Apple, Microsoft, Cisco. You could get your A+ training there, your CCNA, your Security Plus, your MCSA, your CISSP, your Linux Plus. So they cover everything, including Windows, Linux, and OS X. Support for desktops and servers. And it's not boring, far from it. It actually really looks more like the screensavers, doesn't it, on that set? I mean, they really do a great job of making it fun and entertaining. And you can, by the way, watch this, of course, as I am right now on your computer, but you can also watch it on your tablet, on your phone, I guess, or your Roku. They have a Roku channel. So that means you could put it on your TV and leave it playing all day, and by osmosis, you would be prepared. You would be ready. You can take the course library is well divided, so you can actually go to individual questions that you know you're going to get on the test and learn that part. You could see if you look at the course library, they've got so much stuff and more coming all the time. And the price is right. It's much cheaper than going to an IT boot camp. It's kind of comparable to the cost of a study guide if you got a really cheap one. And you get things you wouldn't get from a study guide. For instance, the Measure Up practice exams are included with your subscription. Let me go to the... this is so cool. If you have an HTML5 compatible browser, I know you all do. If I go to the IT Pro Lab, we can actually launch a virtual lab, servers, Windows clients, get the whole thing running. It's a VLab and sandbox, and you don't even have to. You could literally do this with any client, and on a Chromebook, and you would have access to a Windows server. You can't mess it up. You just, as soon as you screw it up, as I always do, you just reboot and you're back to normal. You also get Q&A with the hosts. You get the test exams worth $79. What else? You get annual subscribers can download free DRM-free full episodes, so you can. There it is. I've got Windows Server 2012 R2 running. I mean, this is wild. This is on a Mac. Access to the whole thing. And you can't screw it up. You also, I don't know how to shut it down, so I'm just going to close the tab. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Subscriptions are normally $57 a month. I don't know why I do that every time. I guess I could. What if I do I think if I do shutdown, it just goes. Yeah, it stays there. It just goes anyway. $570 a year, $57 a month. We have a very nice offer, which they just made a heck of a lot nicer. If you go right now to itpro.tv/securitynow and use the code SN30, you'll get 30% off. 30% off. So that means $399 for a year, less than $40 a month. And get this, and this is what they just announced. Once you reach your 13th month of your subscription, they will automatically reduce your subscription rate even farther, bringing your cost down to $24.95 a month, $249 for the entire year. So if you take 2 years, you're good. It's fun. It's fast. It's easy. itpro.tv/securitynow. Get 30% off with the code SN30 and even more off after you do a year. They're celebrating their first anniversary, and this is a way they're sharing their success with you. We're really proud of these guys. A year now, and they've been so successful. And I think a lot of that is due to Security Now, frankly. They love Security Now. They love you, Steve. And so I'm just really pleased for them. We're very proud to be associated with these guys. Congratulations, Tim and Don and the gang on their 1 year anniversary. itpro.tv/security now. Give it a try today. I think you'll like it an awful lot. An easy, entertaining approach to online training. All right, we're going to put you back to work, Steve. You got your eye drops in. You're ready to go. I saw that.
Yeah, they were a little bit dry, and I thought, I'll put a little eye drops in.
It's a good time to do that.
Now they're a little wet.
Well, you're back from Vegas, and there's nothing drier. I mean, I tell you, I go to Vegas, and I come back with a sore throat
Oh, my
every
goodness.
single time.
I know. I was chapped.
Yeah, chapped. Chapped, I tell you. So let's do the security news first, and then we'll go on with the certificate transparency stuff.
Yeah, of course. So it is Patch Tuesday, the second Tuesday of the month. And as I said, I was, and it was we already knew that it was going to be large. Microsoft sends out sort of I don't know why, but sort of a get ready email a week before. They don't tell you what you're getting ready for, but just sort of an overview of just like, here comes, don't forget, Tuesday. So we knew a few days ago that this was going to be a biggie. And it is just independent of severity, in terms of quantity, this leaves nobody wanting. 16 individual patch bundles where, we often have 3, this time 16. And in scanning through the CVE list, I counted 33 known vulnerabilities that were encompassed within these 16 bundles. Except then I looked, and the one for IE, of course, there's always one for IE, it alone had 17 privately reported vulnerabilities that it was fixing. So then I'm thinking, okay, maybe I didn't count correctly, but because it seems like that would lead us to more than 33. But, because typically the bundles all handle multiple vulnerabilities rather than just one. But, this one IE bundle had 17. So anyway, so the third one down was MS14-066. And it's like, okay, and I'm reading what it says. This security update resolves a privately reported vulnerability in the Microsoft Secure Channel. S Channel is their acronym for it, or abbreviation, S Channel, security package in Windows. And it's worth noting that S Channel is in all Windows forever. It was an original component of NT. It's where all of the security stuff resides. So all of the SSL, TLS, certificate handling, all of that's in S Channel. I've programmed it many times. For example, all of that certificate stuff, the certificate fingerprinting stuff that I did on GRC's server, that's all S Channel code. And so forth. So, the point is, it's in both the client and the server. It's in Windows 7 and 8 and, okay, there is no 9, but 10. And also in, XP, in old XP machines, in server 2003, 2008, 2012, and so forth. So, it's everywhere. It is an intrinsic component of Windows. So this security update resolves a privately reported vulnerability in the Microsoft Security Channel, S Channel, security package in Windows. The vulnerability could allow remote code execution if an attacker sends specially crafted packets to a Windows server. So first of all, it's like, whoa, what? All Windows servers on the net, by definition, have ports exposed. That's how you get to them. So there's no hiding for a Windows server. It's out there. That's what it has to be. Then, and we've talked about vulnerabilities, Microsoft's whole vulnerability architecture through the years. So they have the exploitability index. And sometimes these things are like, well, yeah, if somehow you could stand on your right foot raised up on your big toe during a full moon and spin slowly counterclockwise while chanting, then, and through a ping pong ball through a small hoop 10 yards away, you'd have a chance of exploiting it. not here. This is the worst exploitability they offer, index 1, which they call more likely to be exploited. Then we've also talked about how they always have sort of these cheesy mitigating factors where, a bad guy would need to lure you to a website and you'd have to have scripting enabled and click on something and then, agree to down blah, 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 blah. Okay, mitigating factors for this. Quote, Microsoft has not identified any mitigating factors for this vulnerability. In other words, there's nothing you can do.
That sounds good. It's bad. There are no mitigating factors. Oh, that's good. No, that's bad.
Yeah. Like for example, we'll often talk about how, go into the registry and you can add this setting to disable this obscure thing that you don't actually need and nobody actually uses, but it's on all the time anyway, so you can turn it off and then forget about it and you're fine. No. There's nothing that we know of that you can do to mitigate this. And then they also have workarounds where you could turn this off and then turn to blah, blah, blah. So again, workarounds. Microsoft has not identified any workarounds for this vulnerability. So what this says is that, and what I'm a little surprised about is since I saw this morning, I'm seeing Twitter begin to catch up. People are looking through this as I did and going, whoa, hold on, what? Because unfortunately, this doesn't have a fancy name. This isn't Shell Shock or Humpty Dumpty or, anything. No one gave it a cutesy name, but this is like, to understand this is from what this looks like, this is as bad as it gets for a Microsoft, for a major internet server vulnerability just sitting out here.
I'm kind of surprised
I said,
that they're not making a bigger deal out of this.
Well, they don't want to. Oh, and the other thing that I loved was that they do make a point of saying, and we've added 4 shiny new TLS cipher suites. So it's like, well, thanks, but you've also made potentially every Windows server on the internet is going to be vulnerable as soon as the bad guys figure out what it is, what magic packet you can send to every Windows server on the net today to take it over remotely. So they have an FAQ.
That's terrible. So I understand that what they're thinking is, well, look, this isn't in the wild because this was privately found.
Privately reported, yes.
What we would like to do is get everybody patched as quietly as possible.
Yes,
and
exactly.
then we'll mention it.
Just slip it in and get it in. Unfortunately, maybe nobody will notice.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll go, look, we have 4 new TLS cipher suites. Isn't that nice? And it's fixing some little problem over here.
Don't pay no attention to the little problem over there. Cipher suites.
So under their FAQ, they ask themselves the question, because they really have no choice, what might an attacker use the vulnerability to do? Answer, an attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could run arbitrary code on a target server. How could an attacker exploit this vulnerability? An attacker could attempt to exploit this vulnerability by sending specially crafted packets to a Windows server. But would anyone ever think to do that?
Why would anyone?
Why? Well, no. What systems are primarily at risk from the vulnerability? Then they said server and workstation systems that are running an affected version of S-channel are primarily at risk. Okay, wait a minute. There are no server and workstation systems that are not running an affected version of S-channel at this time.
So, okay, let me just capsulize this. There is a vulnerability that affects all versions of Windows Server Windows it's IIS, right?
All versions of Windows.
Of Windows.
Yes, both workstations and servers.
So every version out there of Windows.
Yes.
The vulnerability can be triggered by a remote attack sending misconfigured packets.
Correct.
Of course, that means that the system has to be online, but all servers obviously are. Could it be sent over port 80?
No, it is S channel. It is in the secure suite. So it's some sort of a TLS or SSL deliberate malformed communication.
Could an IIS server that's not running TLS, doesn't have an SSL cert, still be vulnerable?
It's probably not. My guess is that what they have somebody found a buffer overrun in Microsoft's HTTPS, in their SSL TLS protocol. It's that bad.
So just so everybody understands, if I'm running Windows behind a NAT server, if I'm not running Windows bare to the internet, and I'm not running a SSL or a TLS of some kind, I'm not vulnerable.
No. Here's the problem. And where they said, what systems are primarily at risk? And they said server and workstation systems that are running an affected version of S-channel. What may be possible is that any end user who connects to an HTTPS server, in doing that, if that server knew about this and was malicious, it might still bite you.
So a server that is running IIS
a server running any secure server.
But you can compromise it this way easily, that secure server, and then it could go on to compromise anybody connecting to it via SSL.
Or even worse, once this gets out in the wild, once the hackers know what this is, any web server that end users connect to over a secure channel could reverse attack the end user.
But it would have to be compromised.
Well, no, or malicious.
Yeah. But let's say I'm a big company running Outlook web server, so people can use their Outlook mail on the web.
Yeah. Okay.
If my server gets compromised because I'm running IIS and I am out in the public, that compromise could then input malicious code on there that would affect every single person who logged into the Outlook webmail.
Correct.
One after the other. Boom, boom, boom.
Yes. Or you could also be Jimmy's evil blog.
Right.
Jimmy's secure and evil blog offering TLS connections for people who want to read the blog, and it's actually infecting the workstation of everyone who visits.
So the first thing as a hacker I would do is go after VPNs. Servers are clearly the pot of gold.
But
they have to be running IIS or Windows. They have to be running on a Windows machine.
Correct.
An Apache-based server, which is still the majority, fortunately. These are not
and Nginx, they're all going to be safe too. So you're fine.
We're Nginx, absolutely, and Apache,
Yep.
But if you're running, you're not, by the way, because you're running a Windows server.
Right, and so is eBay, and so is Amazon, and not Amazon. eBay is, I think PayPal is. I mean, there are major sites which are on IIS platforms. I don't know what the percentage is now, but maybe
10, 20, 30? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the majority, but it's a significant portion.
Yeah, and everyone knows who they are because the server identifies itself.
If you go anywhere that says ASP or, the active server pages, that's it. So they can be compromised. They, of course, can be compromised to this particular attack, and then they'll pass it along to all other Windows machines. But once you compromise a server, you might as well just put the whole kit and caboodle on there.
Well, yes, and depending upon the site that someone manages to penetrate, we haven't had an exposed server protocol vulnerability. Well, except Heartbleed was that, but that was like as we know, a low statistical likelihood of compromise.
And there was a mitigation. You could just turn off SSL. I mean SSH, and then you're fine.
Right.
There's no mitigation for this. You're saying you can't switch off a service.
Right. This is probably in the underlying S-channel library. If core, it's when your secure server accepts a connection over port 443, SSL TLS. There's something that a bad guy can do to like send a huge mother load packet in containing their own code, and that server will execute their code. I mean, it's like the worst thing that can happen.
Are we not
and
doing
it doesn't sound like it's
by publicizing this? I mean, shouldn't we just all keep this quiet until Microsoft can patch everything?
Well, the good news is, I mean, I have to tell our listeners that anybody, certainly we have listeners who are running.
You're going to know.
We know. Yes, exactly. Anyone who reads this is like going to have their eyes bug out when they come to the third thing on the list. And we certainly have listeners who are in corporations running IIS servers.
And they should know.
They need to know right now. The moment I disconnect, I'm making a little road trip over to my data center because I haven't been over there for a long time, and it's time to do a little, maintenance. But yeah, I'm not leaving this thing hanging for a minute.
This is 2992611.
Yeah, it's the MS14-066.
And it's as bad as it gets.
It is as bad as it gets for a remotely exploitable, hanging out there, flapping in the breeze, open port, pot of gold. Because what hackers want is servers. They want servers. And but end users need to pay attention too, because it may very well be that by connecting to a malicious server, you could expose your workstation, and that's not good either.
What is it on a server? Is there a Windows update just like there is on the desktop client that you?
Yeah, exactly the same procedure. Well, I mean, that's my annoyance with Microsoft is these are really all the same thing. Server 2003 is Windows 7.
Yeah.
So Server 2008 is Vista. 2012 is. No, I got that backwards. But anyway, yes. I mean, the server platform exactly corresponds to a workstation platform. They just configure it differently. They just same foundation, same code, same everything. Yep. So there it is. Vulnerability in S-channel could allow remote code execution.
We have not seen any exploits in the wild as of yet.
Right. When they publish the code, it's not like this is not going to get attention. The bad guys are going to be tearing this thing apart. We can hope that Microsoft did what they could to obfuscate the change they made, like rearranging the code so it's much more difficult to figure out what changed. But they always do that, and we've seen now the pattern. We know that patches are reverse engineered to find out what got changed. So it is certainly no one should rely on the idea that this is not in the wild yet. It's just a matter of days now. And I imagine we'll be talking about this for the next few weeks, that something's going to happen here.
They don't mention XP in this list because they're no longer supporting it.
Right, but I'm sure it's vulnerable.
Well, if Server 2003 is vulnerable, I think that means XP is vulnerable.
Goes all the way back.
Yeah. So
XP, I think 2003, I think it was Windows 2000 and XP. I don't remember how they were paired because there was a Server 2000 I think that was with XP.
Okay.
Because see the fact that Server 2003 is supported.
Well, it's still updated. It's not XP.
I think that corresponds.
Even if the core of it was XP, it's still supported directly.
Right.
Nevertheless,
I think the 2003 and Vista were paired.
Maybe
I think those were the
okay.
two. And 08 and 7 and then 2012, Server 2012 and 8 Windows 8.
Yeah.
So anyway, we amid this gloom, it is significant that we got 4. I mean, the silver lining is we did get 4 shiny new TLS cipher suites, and they are nice. 2 of them use RSA for key agreement. 2 of them use Diffie-Hellman, so we know that gives us it's DHE, ephemeral Diffie-Hellman. We've talked about that. That gives us perfect forward secrecy. So we have 2 new of the 4. 2 give us perfect forward secrecy, which is now what everyone wants, and they're GCM. They're Galois counter mode ciphers. Remember, GCM. That's the same cryptographic mode that I ended up choosing for Squirrel. It's a hybrid authenticated encryption, which does both encryption and authentication at the same time, rather than needing to separately encrypt and authenticate. And as we talked about recently, SSL got it backwards, where unfortunately the authentication happens first and then the encryption occurs, which means that and actually it should have been the other way around, because that means you decrypt, then you authenticate, and that exposes SSL to all kinds of vulnerabilities. So anyway, this is 4 new cipher suites, which I'll also be bringing up this afternoon because they're just beautiful. And very secure, SHA 256 and 384 for the hashes. So I'm glad to have them. So this is a nice update. Unfortunately, it's fixing a real problem that is going to force reboots of all these Windows machines after. Oh, and it does require a reboot, by the way. You're not getting away without because this is core code in the kernel.
Yeah. Wow. So
in
XP is Server 2003 is XP. 2000 is 2000 Pro. So just to get that straight.
And good. So they did. They are going back and fixing 2003.
They are fixing, but they have been fixing.
Right. And they'll fix XP as long as you say that you use that embedded thing hack.
They're still doing that.
Yeah. So XP, I'm still getting updates on XP because I said, oh yeah, I'm embedded.
And you will want this update. Not that most people run server on a plain XP machine, but maybe they do.
No, but remember, clients are vulnerable too.
Clients are vulnerable too. So if you surf to a compromised machine, then you will be compromised. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to go to a compromised machine, but nobody wants to do that.
Right.
In addition, we had, this is like almost it's almost an anticlimax. 17 vulnerabilities fixed in IE. XML core services were patched. Microsoft Office had 3 privately reported vulnerabilities fixed. There's also a problem which we don't often see in TCP/IP. If a bad guy somehow got code running on your machine, this is not something that you have to worry about a lot. But they said in TCP/IP IOCTL processing, this security update resolves a publicly reported. So that's a little that raises the bar. That means that everybody knows about it. Vulnerability in TCP/IP that occurs during the input-output control, that's the IOCTL processing. This vulnerability could allow elevation of privilege if an attacker logs onto a system and runs a specially crafted application. And again, it's like, okay, how's that going to happen? That's like not something you need to worry about. An attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could run arbitrary code in the context of another process. Well, that's not good. If this process runs with administrator privileges, an attacker could then install programs, view, change, or delete data, or create new accounts with full user rights. So this is one of those things where it's difficult to see how they would gain that foothold. But if they did, then, all hell breaks loose. But still, the requirements for this are such that we're not running around with our pants on fire the way we are for this server this first vulnerability we talked about, MS 14.066. But Windows Audio Service also is being fixed. .NET Framework, SharePoint Foundation, Remote Desktop Protocol. IIS has a restriction feature bypass, Active Directory Federation services. Even the Japanese IME, the input method editor, had a vulnerability fixed. And not to be forgotten is the Windows kernel mode driver has some problem where if a specially crafted TrueType font file was put out on a Windows share and a bad guy got you to enumerate it, he could take you over. So, I mean, this thing is just, it's got something for everybody. But one really, really important update for that everyone needs to handle immediately, like when you stop listening to this. So,
nice. Okay.
Yesterday, President Obama, to address him formally, I guess, announced that he's going to ask the FCC to reclassify ISPs as telecommunications carriers under something known as Title II. And this, of course, has rekindled the whole debate. Your producer, Jason, asked me for Brett Glass's email address yesterday. Since Brett, as we know, we had Brett on the podcast to talk about this, sort of has the ISP's viewpoint of...
Yes, an ISP's viewpoint. If we got Jane Jasper of SonicNet, that might be another viewpoint. But but I know Brett feels very strongly against, and so we thought we'd get him on Twit.
Good.
And we're trying to get Nilay Patel to debate him, which would be fiery.
And this would be Sunday? Is this going to be
yeah, so
Sunday's
Brett has
Twit?
confirmed.
Good.
We will have Brett on. And maybe we'll get Dane Jasper if we can't get Nilay. But I want to get both sides of this because I think there are two sides. The Title II regulation is a fairly hardcore regulation. It regulates them as a public utility, and a lot of ISPs do not think that's a good idea.
Right.
A lot of the debate is, well, who do you want to regulate the internet? Do you want the U.S. government to regulate the internet? That seems like a bad idea. But certainly these guys aren't going to regulate themselves, so it's a tough challenge.
It is. I mean, I'm, as an independent serial entrepreneur who's created and operated small companies for my entire life, I want as much freedom as I can have. But I do recognize that the free enterprise capitalistic system has a flaw. There is a tendency, and we see it happen, for large companies to use their inherent power to become larger still. That is, and what that does is it creates an unstable system. From an engineering standpoint, negative feedback is something that creates homeostasis, where as something begins to drift off, if you have feedback that corrects it, then that's good. That tends to create a stable system. The problem is that capitalism is inherently in a free market is inherently unstable. It doesn't tend to self-correct. Large companies tend to get larger because of network effects, as it's known in economics. And so much as I dislike the idea of government, in quotes, regulating, I recognize the need for some control. And I'm unhappy with the idea that there is actually no choice. I have no choice in my source of bandwidth. And it turns out most Americans don't. Most of us have, are first of all unhappy with our bandwidth provider and have absolutely no useful market choice.
And
so,
of course, I'm sure Brett will point this out. The reason you have no choice is because the government intervened in the first place to create monopolies for cable and DSL.
Yeah.
So it's a mess. And I think I don't know what the answer is. President Obama campaigned on the promise of supporting net neutrality. He has been kind of weak, particularly in appointing Tom Wheeler, who many feel is just too compromised.
A lobbyist for the cable industry.
Yeah, and he's the chairman of the FCC. However, I have to say, Mr. Wheeler has been coming up with some pretty good ideas and creative ideas for trying to solve this conundrum. He has not just said, trust the cable companies, they'll be fine. So he's trying to. It seems like he's trying to do his best. But we were waiting for something from the president, and this is exactly I think most internet advocates. This is exactly what they wanted to hear. I have misgivings though, and I think any reasonable person does.
Remember too that as I understand it, and I'm not obsessing about this. I haven't been following it super closely, but as I understand it, the FCC did impose some regulations, and Verizon sued.
That's right.
And the Supreme Court agreed that the FCC did not have the authority to regulate ISPs in that fashion. So basically, this is a response to that by reclassifying ISPs as common carriers. Now there's no question that they fall under the FCC's regulation.
Yeah. This was the roadmap the court gave the FCC. They said, look, you don't have the Congress. Either get Congress to mandate this, because Congress is ultimately the body that tells the FCC what it can and cannot do. Either you get Congress to give you these powers, or you're going to have to go some other route like Title II. And we'll see. Title II, as Brett has pointed out, has regulations that would be considered onerous for any internet service provider, because it's really aimed at Ma Bell. It's aimed at
It's old and it's antiquated, and a lot of it doesn't make sense. Yeah. So, but it's the only thing we've got at the moment.
It'll be very interesting, and we're going to have a great debate on Sunday. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
Okay, so I quietly departed for Las Vegas on Thursday. I never, just sort of general security protocol, I'd never pre-announce when I'm going to be away, because that just seems, unwise. But I always talk about trips when I come back. And I was asked in the summer, I think in August, by DigiCert, my certificate provider with whom everyone knows I am super happy. And of course, I've worked during the whole CRL set thing. They participate in the certificate authority organizing committee and groups, and they had asked if I wanted to do a blog posting or a submission there, and I said no, I've pretty much said my piece. But anyway, when they were holding a security summit, their 2014 security summit, with all of their major customers and other interested parties, they said, "Hey, Steve, would you like to speak?" And I said, "Well, the only thing I really have to talk about is the project that I've been working on for then about 9 months, and that's Squirrel." And they said, "We'd love to have you talk about Squirrel." And I said, "Well, then I'll happily show up." So on Friday, I gave a presentation to the entire conference, basically a 45-minute front-to-back talk, a presentation about Squirrel, how it works, what it does, the whole thing. And I don't know, there was a camera in the back recording it, and I've been so busy since I got back, I haven't had a chance, but I will shoot a note off saying, hey, is that presentation available? Because I did a very nice 45-minute, I left nothing out, covered everything. It's the nicest formal presentation I've put together so far. So maybe I can get a copy of it. But afterwards, in the first break after my presentation, there were a number of people who were interested, came up, and we were chatting. And one of them was Brad Hill, who I had never met, but I certainly knew his name because his name is all over all of the FIDO docs. FIDO is the big sort of historically moving slowly, sort of glacially forward authentication alternative.
This is the one that Yubico key supports is FIDO, right?
Well, they support
FIDO 2.
There's two specs. There's UAF, which is the full one, the Universal Authentication Framework, and then what Stina sort of peeled off the part that she wanted, frankly.
Okay.
And that's called U2F, Universal Two-Factor. And that's what she did with Google, and what we talked about a few weeks ago was that announcement. And so it's sort of Fido Jr., but and it operates very differently, but it borrows some of the technology. Anyway, what really delighted me was that Brad Hill, who's a very nice guy, who was at PayPal during all of this. PayPal made him available to the Fido project, so he was like one of the lead architects of Fido. He's now very recently switched over to Facebook. So he's now a security engineer, his business card says, at Facebook. He said that what he just saw was the most well thought out authentication system he has ever seen in what I presented. In Squirrel.
Awesome.
And it was funny because there's one, the key concept behind Squirrel, the thing that hit me that morning just about a year ago, I think it was in November of 2013. And this just, I'd been reading through Elliptic Curve Crypto and looking at Dan Bernstein's stuff. And there's a place on Dan's page where he's talking about his ED 25519, the 25519 elliptic curve, where he, in a sort of an old Q&A, he says, how do you create a private key? And then his answer is, you don't. And that's what's so special about the crypto that I chose, is that anything can be the private key. And that's the fundamental basis for Squirrel, because that anything is when you take the user's master key and use it to key a hash of the domain name. Then the result of that is the private key. And that's what's so cool, because, for example, what Fido does, and this is unfortunately what like Stina's solution is they choose keys at random. But so now you've got a random private key and the matching public key, and nowhere to store it. So what they do is they encrypt it and give it to the server to store. So you're authenticating to the server, but the first thing you have to do is ask it back for the private key it's been holding for you, and then you decrypt it and use that to sign the nonce that it gives you to prove that you have the private key that it just gave you. So it's like, okay. Anyway, so the point of this is that I sort of gloss over that. Obviously, there's no in a short presentation, I don't have time to dip into everything. So I have a diagram that I showed, it's that diagram on the first page of the Squirrel pages at GRC, where I show that process where you take the master key and hash it with the domain name. That's the private key. Then you run it through an API call to produce the public key. And then you also use the private key to sign the URL. And the private key and the public key is your identity token. And the signature is your proof that you have the private key. And I just and then I move on. And so Brad was looking at that and, really knows crypto, but wasn't aware of this particular property of the Bernstein 25519 elliptic curve. So he came up to me as part of, when we were talking about this, and he said, remember that famous, actually he told me, he says, you really need to, change your presentation, because you just sort of skipped over that step. And he said, remember that, that famous joke where, Einstein or someone is on a chalkboard and they're working out a proof of a theorem, and they get stuck. They paint themselves into a logical corner, And so in this series of equations, there's like a little puff of smoke, and it says, and then a miracle happens. And so his point was that he recognized, because he understands this stuff, that apparently something was missing. But it's this particular choice of crypto that solves that problem, and that's the magic of Squirrel. And of course, now he understands that. And so then he was digesting that, realizing that I'd just obsoleted the way Fido worked, because it was a kludge and Squirrel wasn't. Ooh. So anyway,
how did he react to that?
Well, I didn't rub his face in it, but he was.
Did he kind of understand that?
Oh yeah, he definitely understood it. He said to me, he said, that means there's no need to have the server store the private key on behalf of the user anymore. I said, right.
And he said,
we don't do that with Squirrel.
Oh,
it's much better, actually.
Interesting. Wow.
So yeah. Anyway, but he's a super nice guy, and I think he was glad for the meeting, and I certainly was, because somebody who really knows this stuff was able to watch the presentation and then say, this is the most well-designed authentication system I've ever seen, and this is the guy who just spent 5 years doing that. So wow.
I hope people pay attention to that.
Well, it's going to succeed if it should. I hope it does. So I have one last security thing, and this is important. For everyone who has a Belkin N750 dual band router. I mentioned this. It's this specific router, but it's been around for 3 years. It went on the market in 2011. So it's Belkin's N750 dual band router. There is a very easily exploited vulnerability that allows an attacker to gain root on the router through exploiting the guest network, which there's a problem with. Just by some the guest network has a web page, has a little web server where you authenticate, and a specially crafted post verb. HTTP has get and post for submitting only a URL query or that plus a block of data. And post is typically used, for example, for submitting the contents of forms. If you maliciously format the post submission, you can access the telnet server and get access to the telnet, basically the command prompt, with full root access on the router.
Oh crap!
So they have a firmware update. The firmware that everyone currently has ends in 1.10.16m, as in Michael. What you want is 1.10.17. 1.10.17m, as in Michael. So just a heads up, I'm sure within the sound of my voice, with our whatever we have, about 100,000 listeners, there are people with Belkin N750 dual band routers. As a workaround, you can immediately shut down the guest mode if you want, if you're concerned. But this allows war driving to really be,
war driving.
War driving. It really means war.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and in the show notes, I have a link to the guys that found it and a very simple proof of concept. It's trivial to implement. Oh, and I forgot to mention, it's been put into Metasploit. So it's an automated remote takeover module in Metasploit. So also very available. So anybody with this Belkin N750, update your firmware. Get .17m from Belkin.
And we don't say this enough because so many of these router manufacturers never update their firmware.
Yeah, they're just not good about it.
Well, it's such a commodity device.
You're right. You're right.
So
Right.
thank you, Belkin, for fixing it.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It really. I'm glad you said that, Leo. That's a very good point. It's easy for us, and I mean, we just sort of take it for granted. But you're right. Consumers. There's probably not a lot of demand because consumers are typically see it as like a set it and forget it box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of incentive. I'm sure there's no money in fixing it, but they really should fix it. So good.
I was exchanging tweets with somebody last week, and I don't remember now what the topic was, but it was related to security, and he said I guess in the tweet in his tweet he said that by the way, SpinRite just came to the rescue for me, and he sent me a link to his blog post from last month, so a couple of weeks ago, October 2014, and the topic was his subject was universal fix for Windows KSOD, and I thought, what? We know about the BSOD, the blue screen of death. I thought, what's a KSOD? So he said, ever had your Windows installation inexplicably die, leaving your computer unusable without a fix? I have, more times than I'd like to count. The last time this happened was yesterday, when Windows 7 would only boot into a black screen with a movable cursor, also known as the black with a capital K screen of death. So, B was already taken for blue screen of death, so he used the K at the end of black, so KSOD for black screen of death. He said it was a serious case considering none of the safe modes or repair function in the Windows boot options would work.
Yikes.
Each option would universally end in either a KSOD, as he calls it, or the classic BSOD after hanging on, and then he has ASWRVRT.sys during safe boot. After exhaustively eliminating all possible regular fixes that were available on the internet, I decided it was time for the big guns. Steve Gibson's SpinRite. He said, prior to trying SpinRite, I first tried Kaspersky's Rescue Disk 10, which was entirely useless for my case. After booting from the Rescue USB dongle, I would always get a missing operating system error in the boot screen. So it sounds like Kaspersky was needing a little more there than was present. And of course, SpinRite needs nothing. It operates with, it brings its own little, OS along with it. So anyway, he said, not reassuring. I have long been a fan of Steve Gibson's Security Now podcast, which is why I knew of the tool. I knew the tool would be one of the few things that might do the trick, so I gave it a shot. After about an hour running SpinRite 6 and a few reboots later, my Windows 7 installation was working perfectly, as if nothing had ever happened. SpinRite saved the day. And then there's a bunch of stuff that I'm skipping over, because then he said TL:DR. SpinRite at the end, SpinRite saved my machine from a perpetual and otherwise unbeatable KSOD scenario. And my guess is that if you are having KSOD problems, then SpinRite is one of the few things that might help you too. So I don't have his name, unfortunately, in front of me, but thank you. I'm sure he's listening to this right now. So I appreciated our Twitter exchange, and thanks for sharing the link. Yep, and there it is.
Universal
fix. Very, very cool screenshot showing the Dynastat system.
Yeah, yep. Non-trivial to get a Dynastat screenshot, because you're running DOS.
Exactly.
I don't know how you'd get that. That's funny. That's awesome. Very nice. So he didn't even send this to you. This is just, you saw the blog post.
Yeah, well, he sent me the link.
Oh, he did.
So that, okay. So I was able to find it that way.
Right. And it's reposter.net. All right, a break has come. You may have a warm beverage of your choice, Mr. G.
Refill my coffee cup.
Refill the mug, because here we go. We're talking a little bit about VPNs, protecting yourself online, and then we will continue on with Steve and the subject of the day, which is certificate transparency.
Yep.
Yep. Whatever that means, we'll find out. But first, let's talk about protecting yourself, your privacy online. If you're at an open access point, you know that you're sending your data through the air, and anything that is not encrypted is visible to anybody who sits there with a simple tool. But did you also know that your internet service provider could be watching everything you do? And the same thing at the hotel and everywhere else you go. That's why the best solution is an open VPN server. Now, the ideal would be, well, I shouldn't even say the ideal. You could set up your own, but then it's going to emerge from wherever you set that up. What ProXPN offers is something even better. Open VPN servers you can log into all over the world. So your data, your presence emerges publicly on the net, not just in the U.S., Dallas or Seattle or Los Angeles or New York City, but also London, Amsterdam, Singapore. So you get total privacy. You can eliminate geographic restrictions by coming out at a different part of the world. It is the best way to protect yourself against free Wi-Fi, open access points. With ProXPN, you get a secure encrypted tunnel through which all your data passes. Any online application will work with ProXPN, of course, your browser, your email, file sharing, instant messaging programs. So this is the way to globally encrypt everything you're doing on the internet. Works via Open VPN or PPTP if you prefer, although we know PPTP is less than desirable. You might say, well, my mobile device isn't going to support Open VPN. Yes, it is. Thanks to ProXPN's free iPhone and Android apps, you get the benefits of desktop Open VPN on your mobile device. There's software for Windows and Mac, too, which gives you even more control. You can select ports, connect at startup, select which programs should be shut down if your anonymous connection is ever interrupted. Here's the deal. Go to proxpn.com/twit. You'll learn more about it. Remember, it's OpenVPN from ProXPN. You understand. It's a different website. proxpn.com/twit. You will read about all of the technologies involved, and you can even see a table that talks about the free version of ProXPN and the premium version of ProXPN and the extra features you get. The cost normally of a pro version of ProXPN is $10 a month, or you could buy for a year, but we've got a special, which will give you a reduced cost of, I think, about $6 a month. But we've got a special offer. Use the code SN50 at checkout. You're going to get 50% off the monthly price when you sign up for a 12-month subscription. That means less than $5 a month when you sign up for a year. And that's good, not just for the first month or year, but for the lifetime of your account. And it is like a free trial because if you're not satisfied, you can cancel within 7 days and get a full refund. So you have a week to try it and decide, is this right for me? I think you'll think it is. And I want you to use that offer code SN50 so you get 50% off your year-long subscription, bringing it down to $5, less than $5 a month. ProXPN, they accept payments through Visa, PayPal, and yes, Bitcoin. Now we're talking. We thank ProXPN so much for their support of Security Now. Visit proxpn.com/twit. Use the code SN50, SN50, 50% off your yearly subscription for the life of your account. Let us continue on with Mr. Gibson and a little bit of certificate transparency.
Okay, so everyone knows who's been following the podcast for any period of time how the current certificate authority anchored system operates. The idea is that certificate authorities verify the identity to differing degrees of entities, individuals, companies, organizations of any kind who want to have want to assert their identity on the internet. So the idea is that they prove who they are to the certificate authority. They provide their server's public key to the CA, the certificate authority. The certificate authority signs that public key and gives it back to them. Then whenever someone connects to them, they send the client the user's web browser, typically, this signed public key. The public key itself is the key to them establishing a secure connection with each other, because their private key, the matching private key, never leaves their control, and them having the private key that matches the public key they've just provided is the way a secure tunnel is bootstrapped, such that nobody listening in the middle can intercept. And the fact that it's signed by the certificate, that this public key, which is what's going to be used for communication, the fact that it's signed means that somebody else, a third party, whom the client trusts to have performed due diligence, is asserting, yes, this is really Amazon or Facebook or eBay or PayPal or GRC or whomever you're establishing a secure connection with. So that's the model. Now, we've talked about the many ways this fails. Good as it is, there are problems with it. For example, we're trusting, hundreds, many, like 400 or 500 different authorities with this performance of due diligence. And the problem is, whereas all of GRC's certificates are only signed by my chosen certificate authority, DigiCert, it is entirely possible for, and I'll just pick on them because they're my typical whipping boy, it's entirely possible for the Hong Kong Post Office to sign a fraudulent certificate asserting that it is GRC, and if the Hong Kong Post Office, which is a CA, a certificate authority, is trusted by the user's browser, then a different website can impersonate GRC if they're also able to get DNS to cooperate, because somebody's web browser has to believe they're going to GRC but be given the wrong IP address or be intercepted and rerouted to a fraudulent server that's offering a certificate signed by an untrustworthy certificate authority. So that's one of the problems. Then, of course, that's like the malicious CA problem. But then there's the compromised certificate authority. And remember, we talked about years ago that the famous DigiNotar problem. DigiNotar was I think they were Dutch certificate authority that had a breach, had hundreds of certificates created. Somehow in their system, somebody got in and was able to get all kinds of certs signed. They knew about it and didn't tell anybody, hoping that they could get away with it. Well, the fact that they found out about it and kept quiet ended them. They were bankrupt a few months later, because it's one thing, anyone can make a mistake, but if you're a CA, you have got to immediately acknowledge that when you find out there's a problem and take responsibility for it. And the fact that they didn't meant that no one could ever and would ever trust them again. All the browsers immediately suspended their support. And if you don't have browsers trusting you, remember, this whole thing is that the browser verifies the certificate by trusting the signer of it. And if the browsers retract their trust of the certificate authority, that certificate authority is out of business. They can't assert their reputation, even if they hadn't completely wrecked their reputation. So there's that problem, and then so we have the malicious CA, we've got the compromised CA, and then just the mistake where, like there was another instance more recently where a certificate authority had issued a certificate that had CA rights. That is, normally the intermediate certificates are themselves unable to be a certificate authority, but that's just a bit flag in the privileges, in the characteristics of the certificate. And one CA did issue an infinitely powerful certificate that was able to sign any search of any kind. And so that mistake was corrected. So the point is that there are a number of things, a number of ways that this existing hierarchy with certificates can break. And so and because of Google's size, they are almost always at least among the websites that are compromised. That is, they're discovering bogus certificates that they didn't issue that other people issued. And I mean, one of the things that is nice about Chrome, the Google browser, is that they've built technology in where Chrome knows much more about the specific, because Chrome is from Google. Chrome knows about the validity of Google's own certificates and immediately sends up all kinds of warnings if a certificate that appears to be valid for Google.com or any of Google's properties is used on the Chrome browser that's actually not from Google. So they're in a special place, having both making certificates and their own browser that can be aware of all the certificates that should be considered legitimate. But none of the rest of us have our own browsers that everybody's using, so that doesn't work for us. Still, Google has spiders, bots, which are out rummaging around the internet. That's what they do. They're basically going to all websites and servers, following links, sucking down and indexing the entire internet. And so it occurred to them at some point, it's like, hey, every time we connect to a server following a secure link, and that's happening historically more and more, we get the certificate. That's what happens. The first stage of establishing a secure connection is the secure server sends the client, that in this case is a Google bot, the certificate. So they began to think, why don't we start collecting all of these certs? Because, these are all the certs on the internet, all the certificates. And when you think about it, that doesn't exist anywhere. There's no central repository of all the certificates. But imagine if there were. Imagine if every certificate issued existed in some kind of database that could be queried. I would love to query it. Hey, what are the grc.com certificates? Let me have them. Because, boy, don't I want to know if there are any that that I don't know about. And in fact, everybody wants to know that.
It couldn't be used to validate because some might be bogus.
Well. And so, yes. So the first phase of this was this notion of collecting them all. And okay, so we use Google's bots to create this database. Then Google started saying, okay, what we want is somehow they sort of made this conversion to this idea of, okay, we'll put all the certificates in that we encounter. Now, we'd like to be able to allow people to query the database for properties that they care about and find out if, what certs we have encountered that are there. We'd also like to encourage certificate authorities to submit certificates that they're in the process of issuing. So this is it's going to kind of have to bootstrap itself, but the idea would be that ultimately this database would run in parallel to the existing CA verification. First of all, and they call it a log. They call it the certificate transparency log. It's not a log in the traditional sense of, and as I'll explain in a second, they call it a log because, like a log, a correct log, it has what they call an append-only property. That is, by its design, all you can ever do is append to it. So it's a chronology of all the certificates that have been found so far, and the structure of it is such that it can only be appended to, and it has a series of security properties in its design that allow it, that don't require it to be trusted. This is where it starts to get a little mind-bending from a security standpoint. But the idea would be that if it exists and its design is correct, and I should say it does exist and the design is correct, so these are I'm sort of trying to lay down a framework for understanding this, and it could be trusted, and again, that problem has been solved, and I'll get to that in a second, then web browser clients could rely on it as an additional source of information. That is, people who owned domain properties could check the log to verify that only the properties, the domain properties that they own are present. That is, there are no fake versions of their certificates. And if they found them, then they would go through the normal process for remediating them. They would notify all browser vendors and tell the CA who issued that cert that this was bogus and get them to revoke it, and tell the browsers to revoke it, and so forth. So the idea is that you first of all, to get this thing bootstrapped, browsers will only trust certificates that they receive from servers if those certificates are members of this certificate transparency database. And so that's a requirement. That is, the certificate must be in the database in order for the browser to trust it. And then the database must be queryable by the owners of the certificates to allow bad certificates to be found, because only if a bad certificate is in the database will a browser trust it. So what's useful about this is that it is by creating a sort of a repository of all certificates. We don't have that now. Right now, the browser receives the certificate from the web server and checks the chain of trust back, the validity of the chain of trust back to someone, some single certificate authority that signed it. But that does allow within a controlled environment, like in Iran, just to pick on someone, for them to control a CA and for them to issue certificates for Google.com, for example, which appear to be valid only because the chain of trust is local. It's never being having a bright light shined on it. It's never being exposed to the light of day. It's the protocol doesn't have global scope. This system gives certificates global visibility, which Google calls certificate transparency. So, okay, now how does this work? One way, the way to start visualizing this is the first way to think about it, which is not the way it's actually structured, but we have to start somewhere, is as a chain, a linear chain of hashes of certificates. So you start with the first certificate, and you take the SHA 256 hash. Now you take the second certificate, you append the hash of the first one to it, and you hash them. Now you have a second hash, which you append to the third certificate and hash them. And now you have a third hash, which you append to the fourth certificate and hash them, and you have the fifth hash, and so on. So what you have is a chain of hashes of certificates, which creates a dependency chain. That is, when you get done hashing all the certificates in this, one by one in this chain, if you think about it, due to the way hashes work, the resulting single hash is a value which you only get if every certificate that you only get as a result of hashing all of the certificates sequentially. And now moving forward from there, any new certificates that come along, it's easy to evolve this. That is, from a given starting point of having all that work done in the past, you hash any new certificates sequentially, adding them to the front of the chain, and the resulting final hash is the head of this chain. And so essentially, thanks to this magic cryptographic processing of the way hashing works, essentially you're able to state the proof that every single previous certificate has been seen if you get this final value. And incrementally, what this means is it's provable that you have this append-only property, because any particular version of this log, this log is this chain of hashes, is the full proper superset of any previous version. That is, because you can always look at any previous version is entirely representable just by the final hash that was its head, and you append to it by hashing additional certificates. Now, if that was the actual model, this would be not be very practical and very cumbersome. So it turns out that instead of a linear chain, we can use a tree. And if we use a tree structure, suddenly this thing becomes incredibly cool. There's a data structure known as a Merkle, M-E-R-K-L-E, a Merkle hash tree. And a Merkle hash tree is exactly what I described, but using a binary tree structure rather than a linear hash chain. And I don't think I've really ever talked about trees. One of the things I had always planned to do on the podcast was do a fundamental data structures series of podcasts to talk, because we've done other fundamental things like CPUs and the internet and other stuff. And I thought data structure, the fundamental underpinnings of data structures would be really great, but the world's just gone crazy with security problems, and we've had very little chance to talk about that kind of stuff. But a binary tree is if you took two things, like two hashes of certificates, and hashed them together, and then took two other hashes of certificates and hashed them together. Then you took those two hashes that you had done and hashed them together into a top one. So you can sort of see how there's a top node which splits into two, and it splits into two, and so on. So it turns out that okay, and what I just described is that is a Merkle hash tree. All it is a series of joinings from the bottom up of two hashes into a third, or to make a third, and then somewhere else you take two hashes to make a third, and then you hash those together to make a fourth, and so on. So this binary tree has the very cool property that, and this is where it's difficult. I mean, I'm already sort of into where it's difficult to do this on an audio podcast without any audio visual tools. But the idea is that where the size of the log grew as a linear function, if it was just that first linear example, if you use a binary tree, it grows with the log of the number of certificates. That is, it grows incredibly more slowly. So that, for example, if you double the size or you double the number of certificates that are in the tree, the tree is able to grow only requires one additional level of growth. So it is a far more efficient means for storing these hashes. And if anyone's curious, look up Merkle hash trees, because essentially what this means is that every certificate that has ever been found, and I should explain, these logs exist now. There are about 7 or 8 of them that are being maintained. Google has about 4. DigiCert, my certificate authority, was working with Google on this early on. They're running one, and there are a couple other people who are. And it is Google's intention, last I saw, to in Chrome, starting in just a few months, in February of 2015, to require certificates to be present and proven in this certificate transparency log to have EV status. So this is another thing Google is doing to work on dramatically strengthening the certificate authority system. It's easy to get lost in the weeds here, because it turns out that when you have this tree structure, you can demonstrate that very few nodes need to be known in order to provide a proof that a given certificate is present in the tree. And that's the key. If we had this single linear list of chained hashes to prove that a single given certificate was in the tree, we would have to have the hash in front of it, that is the hash that was there before it was added, and its hash and all the certificates since, to get to prove that the value we end up with is the value at the end of the chain. But by breaking this down into a binary tree, the number of hashes that we need is just a handful, because the binary tree structure is so efficient that it is very economical to provide a proof that any given certificate in the world has been represented in this tree. And that's what's so cool about this, is the proof is very efficient and very lean, and that allows all the certs to be dumped in. And what will be happening in the future is that certificate authorities will be voluntarily submitting their certificates to this certificate transparency log, which is in this tree structure, in order to essentially pre-announce their certificate as being in the world. And so we'll no longer have a situation where a certificate authority can go rogue and have its rogue issued certificates blindly accepted by browsers, and having us maybe discover that exists. Once this system is in place and running and enforced, within a matter of hours, typically, any maliciously issued certificate will be found. So that's the ambitious project that Google embarked on about a year ago, RFC 6962, if anyone's interested. And in the little abstract first paragraph, it says, this document, that is the certificate transparency document, describes an experimental protocol for publicly logging the existence of TLS certificates as they are issued or observed, in a manner that allows anyone to audit certificate authority activity and notice the issuance of suspect certificates, as well as to audit the certificate logs themselves. The intent is that eventually clients would refuse to honor certificates that do not appear in a log, effectively forcing certificate authorities to add all issued certificates to the logs. So ambitious, but it may happen. And a very, it's a substantial and significant addition to the Internet's security infrastructure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for
certificate transparency.
And by which we don't mean disappearing, we mean transparency about the
visibility.
The
yes,
provenance.
visibility.
Yeah, visibility.
Yeah, exactly. Making making what's happening transparent to everyone.
Don't know what this means, but the chat room just pointed out that Open Whisper Systems has just tweeted that Red Phone was removed from the Play Store today. The tweet says, we don't know why, but we've reached out to Google support for more information. That was one of the security products created by Open Whisper Systems, along with the secure text messenger that we had recommended.
Right. And I should mention that these Merkle hash trees, they're in LimeWire and Bitcoin and Nutella. I mean, the Merkle hash tree itself is not an invention of Google. It's a very handy way for managing peer-to-peer file sharing, in order to handle it, in order to like verify that sets of files that have been received are valid by taking their hashes and then receiving a chunk of the tree, and by evolving these trees over time. The Merkle hash tree itself is a really interesting data structure in fundamental computer science. It was invented back in 1975, I think. And has been around and used for many different purposes ever since.
Interesting. Yeah. Steve is at grc.com. That's where you'll find SpinRite, the world's finest hard drive maintenance and recovery utility. We highly recommend it. While you're there, though, you might want to check out some of the freebies Steve offers at grc.com, including this show. 16 kilobit audio is there of the show. That's the smallest audio file we offer. Plus a full text transcript written by Elaine Ferris. Thank you, Elaine. And all sorts of other stuff, including more information about his squirrel protocol. If you want to get involved in that, there's forums. There's a lot going on. If we do a Q&A next week, your questions will come to Steve in one of two ways. He does read tweet replies. So at SGGRC is his handle. And you can also use his website. That's probably the best way. grc.com/feedback, and your feedback will be received by Steve that way. We have full quality audio and video of the show at our own site, twit.tv/SN. We also make sure that it's available everywhere you get your finer podcasts. If you want to watch live, you can do so at twit.tv every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 2100 UTC at twit.tv. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, my friend, I will be watching Brett Glass talk about net neutrality on this coming Sunday.
Yep.
And we'll orient for a Q&A next week.
And while we don't ever reveal Steve's itinerary, I do think he might be heading over to level 3 at some point later today.
Yes, everybody, update your Windows systems. I'll be doing that. You'll notice that GRC disappears from the net briefly here in about
reboots.
an hour or so.
Thanks, Steve. We'll see you next time on Security Now. Bye-bye.